All right, well, hello and welcome everybody. I see our attendees list continues to grow. So we're gonna just take a quick moment, make sure everybody is inside our webinar, and we'll go ahead and get started in just a short moment. Okay, I think we can get started. So hello and welcome everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening from wherever you are calling in the world. I'm Ryan Cantwell. I'm a principal consultant and trainer with the 280 Group, and I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. Our webinar today centers around the art of prioritization and building a roadmap that more hopefully inspires action than anything. And this is a topic I am sure many of you deal with every day. So next slide, please, Sneha. And I am particularly excited to introduce to all of you, Sneha Narahalli. She is the Vice President and Head of Product at Sephora. So Sneha, would you please introduce yourself?
As Ryan mentioned, I am Sneha. I lead all of the product at Sephora. I've been here a year and a half. And in my presentation, I'll talk to you a little bit more about who I am, why I'm here, and why you should spend a few minutes here listening to me, and why I can share a few insights that I hopefully feel like you guys can take away something.
All right, well, we are so excited to have you. Thank you for being with us, Sneha. Now, let's go over just a few formalities, everybody, as we get going throughout the webinar. So next slide, please, Sneha. Just a quick introduction of the 280 Group. If you are unfamiliar, it is our mission to empower product professionals with the knowledge and tools to build products that matter. And simply put, we're products people with decades worth of real world experience in the discipline. There is nothing we love more than sharing our passion for product through opportunities like this webinar. So thank you for being with us today. So next slide, please, Sneha. So whether you need help as an individual, growing your own knowledge and skills, or you're working on improving your team's effectiveness, we have the experience and services that will get you to that next level. So check us out. I see we have included our link in the chat. We'd love for you to click through and even follow us, give us a follow on LinkedIn. So check us out. So next slide, please. And I do invite you, speaking of LinkedIn, to find us there. We have built a community of other like-minded product professionals so we can chat, we can share best practices and tips with all of you. So you can access that group with the link in the chat box. Look at that, it just appeared. And we'd love for you just to give us a follow there and see a lot of the good things that we do. So next slide, please. So during the webinar, as we're together today and at the 280 Group, we do like interacting with you. So during the webinar, I encourage all of you to ask questions. Please use the QA box or the chat box that's available to you at the bottom of your screen to type in questions at any time. We will leave time at the end, everyone, for Q&A. So we will also be monitoring that throughout the presentation and may pick a couple of questions here and there throughout. But I will say our most popular question, no matter what, is, can I watch this webinar later? And the answer is yes, of course you can. So if you have registered, you will receive a link to view this webinar recording after it is ended. So we will make that available to you. Now, let's get started. And I will turn it over to Sneha.
Thank you, Ryan. I know you told me to mute all my notifications, but I can't mute my dog who's playing with his toy. So if you hear a few squeaky noises in the background, it's my dog. So as Ryan introduced, today we're going to talk about the art of prioritization and why we're here. Just a little bit more about my journey and why I'm here. Both my parents were writers. I was an aspiring writer and poet till I realized that it doesn't make as much as money as being in technology. I studied back in India. Then I came to the US, and I came here to Carnegie Mellon. I did my master's in Carnegie Mellon. And after that, I got into product management quite by accident. As I was with Sears, I was part of like a rotational journey where we could actually go through several rotational programs of like being in engineering, product management. I tried my stint at product management and figured out that this is what I loved. Ever since then, I've been with Sears, Walmart, with Sephora, not intentionally, but have been with retail for over a decade now. And currently at Sephora, I lead the product management for the digital experiences, the data, as well as the marketing technology. Loving it here, love the culture and having fun at what I do. Why me? As Ryan mentioned, this topic has been discussed many, many times across so many different, locations online, their courses. What could you possibly learn here that you have not already seen? And even if you slept through all of this presentation, or like I know it's like a Friday morning, what were some of the things that possibly I could share? I think personally for me, over the decade, like I have come to think in terms of currency of time. So everything that I operate in, how do I prioritize things, whether it's personal or professional? Like I have this constant clock in the back of my head that's thinking, okay, is this worth my effort? Is this worth my time? Do I need to like actually put some effort into this? So I think I've fine-tuned the way that I operate to think in currency of time. And this was not something that has come easily and naturally to me. I think I've struggled with it during my initial years, and not to say that I'm like, perfect at it right now. It's definitely an ongoing journey. But I've also made some mentors along the way and like spoken to them and like had some good conversations on the best practices they use. And of course, prioritization is critical for any PDM. And what I've seen perfectly works is the fact that if we can do it in a simple and personalized way, I know we talk about personalization of customer experiences and customer journeys, but the way you're prioritizing products, if you can personalize that as well and put your product management hat on in the framework for prioritization, I think that drives most value, because each company operates in a very different way. And it's kind of hard to say that this formula is successful for all. So it's kind of like adding the external variables and figuring out how you're going to make the secret sauce of prioritization work for the environment that you're in. So what is prioritization? Again, in a very simplistic way, in the definition of what actually the dictionary describes, it's to organize things so that the most important thing is done or dealt with first. I think the foremost thing in bringing people along the prioritization journey is not complicated, right? So making it simple to understand what is it that we're doing, why we're doing it, and why this needs to be done. So I'm going to spend the next couple of slides talking a little bit more on each of these words that we're using in describing what prioritization is. So what does organized things mean? What is important? And what does dealt with first mean? So when you say organizing things, I think it's important for us to create a process of having an intake for all the things that come your way where you need to spend effort or time. This could be your existing asks, your new asks that come, your bugs and enhancements, or even process changes. I think some of us kind of don't think of process changes as something that needs to be prioritized. that's when I go back to my thinking of anything where you need to spend time and effort needs to be prioritized, because it takes away your focus in addressing that which probably could have been spent in another task that you're doing. So process changes or improvements also comes into this category, because you're kind of having everything that you need to work on in a single list and organized in a way that makes sense. And being in product management, as you guys know, it's just not us sitting in a room and saying this is how we're going to operate. Most of our jobs is making sure that everybody else in the company understands what is happening and they are aligned and it makes sense to them. So how do you create a process that, you know, is leveraged by the company and your other stakeholders so that it makes sense? So when you have this intake process that you establish, this is an example of what we currently use at Sephora, where we have a different methodology for intake process for new ideas, feature enhancements, and bugs, and also explain what a new idea means, what does a feature enhancement means, and what a bug means, because the definition can be subjective based on who the audience is. So if it's a brand net new idea, which possibly will have a larger level of effort and involves a completely new development, if it's a feature enhancement that is an improvement to an already existing feature, or if there's an error or an issue or a client facing or internal, like it goes through a different priority process, because that needs to be addressed first because your customers are being impacted by it. And this is a screenshot of some of the things that we ask for the users to fill in, so that when we are prioritizing the asks or the enhancements, it makes sense to us and we are able to gauge why it's important. And again, this is just a snapshot. There are many other fields here. The intention is not to make it so cumbersome that you scare people away from entering this, but more what is the fields that we probably would need to help understand the prioritization process. So now that we have things organized, it's also helpful to pick a common currency so that you create an even playing field for the tasks that you need to spend your resources on, because you can't have different currencies that you're thinking of, which will be hard for you to evaluate what is more important than the other one.
Yeah, and Sneha, this is an interesting point. I love the image that you've included here of comparing apples to hamburgers. And sometimes it feels like that when we're prioritizing, right? And I would encourage everybody listening to find flexibility in your process and make sure that you are able to compare dissimilar things, because it's natural that's going to happen. We will need to do those as we prioritize.
Yes. And again, like I think what I've seen happen in the past, Ryan, when it's hard to pick a common currency, you naturally lean towards being more subjective than objective by saying it improves customer experience. Like ultimately, yes, we want to make our customers' life easier, but that can't be an excuse for everything that you do, because everything is about improving customer experience. So it's really helpful for us to be deliberate and cognizant of what exactly we're measuring and how are you creating this common currency. And I'll share a little bit more on how this can be done, because I do see a lot of people struggling with this. And of course, I was one of those people who was struggling with this in the past, where when you're thinking in terms of impact, I think there are different flavors of what you're thinking of, right? Like whether it's incremental revenue, it's savings, it's efficiency, it's strategic, it's foundational. Now, how do you convert all of this to a common currency, be it, dollars that you're talking about, or if you have any other things, increase in sales or market share, or what is the goal of the company that you're currently working at? So even though we have different flavors of what impact means, we should identify a way of converting it into a common currency. And I'll share a little bit more on how we'll do it in the upcoming slides as well. One thing that we need to make sure currency is not is it's not the loudest person or the highest paid person in the room, because oftentimes we fall prey to your CEO or your boss asking for certain things, and prioritizing certain things can't be the reason, can't be that I was told to do this or someone said so. And I'm sure when somebody does say that this needs to be done, there might be like reasoning behind why that person is saying certain things. So it's helpful to understand where that person is coming from to get the deeper details on why it's important, rather than just assuming and relying that that person has done the due diligence. Because individually, I'm sure all of us bring so much to the table. So it'll be good to bring your point of view as well, irrespective of who the person is who's asking for certain initiatives that you need to do. And ideas come from all sources, right? So if you look at this pie chart, like insight come from customers, 28%, come from employees, vendors, and partners. So when you have this intake process and you're creating an even playing field, make sure that you're being inclusive of all the ideas that you're getting from different sources. But ultimately, irrespective of like where your ideas are coming from, it all goes through the funnel that you have defined so that it makes sense for you as a product manager to prioritize asks that is coming from different sources as well.
And Sneha, if I can say quickly, I would put money on that the employee insights that we get are driven from their knowledge of the customer. So that even increases the weight that insights from the customer has on us and influences the decisions we make in terms of priority.
For sure. And I think adding to that, Ryan, employees also know the inner workings of how the sausage is made. So it's a less biased hat, maybe, unless you're super biased yourself, in being able to articulate the ask. So yeah, definitely we should make sure we are leveraging this resources of employees and using them for, the ideas that we generate. So here is an example of thinking in terms of impact, right? Like improving customer experience is great, but it's improving customer experience because it will increase CLV, which will then result in dollar amount, right? So keep asking the question, this will result in this, will result in this, until it leads to your common currency that you have determined. And if it's not something that ultimately results in this, then that's a conversation that we need to have. And I can share like a few examples where it kind of doesn't lead to this common currency. Strategic importance, tying to the vision, which will have long-term ROI, like a defined period, right? So again, long-term can't be the next couple of years. Like, is it 3 to 5 years, 2 years? What exactly are you defining this long-term period as? And how does that extrapolate in terms of the dollar amount? And can you then annualize that dollar amount that you're getting so that you're still quantifying your strategic importance? Efficiency in terms of labor savings, time savings, resulting in cost savings of dollars. So here is like a few thought processes on how to convert some of the KPIs that you have to a common currency so that you can make it on an even playing field. Some of the things that we should be a little cognizant of, not thinking of in terms of impact, is this has worked before, this is an industry standard, this is what everybody is asking, everybody else is doing, we were asked to do this. I think these conversations are good starting points, which is this is an industry standard is good, but then it'll help to evaluate what the exact number of the industry standard is. Does it make sense for us at this point? And again, if there is a standard, how do you convert it into a dollar amount that makes sense? So now that we have spent some time talking about organizing the things, creating an even playing field, how do you define important? How do you make sure it aligns with your goals, and how does it make sense to the others who are part of this journey, to for them also to feel that what we are working on as a team is important?
And Sneha, I have a question for you. Does important also mean urgent, or are they two different things?
Urgent is a parameter in the important, and it's not one-to-one mapping, right? Important does not mean urgent, because that's where, when we're defining the value of a feature that we're building, we are also looking at like speed to market, but you're looking at speed to value, because yes, it's urgent for us to get this done, but urgent because why? Are we going to lose out on the first to market advantage that we'll have, or any other reason why it's important? So I think it's part of the different parameters that will define importance, but it's not the single one that defines it.
Got it. Thank you.
So how are you defining importance, and how are you making sure your features are aligning with the vision? So I've kind of given an example here of what a vision statement could be. How are you measuring the vision, and what is your 3-year strategy of aligning, of getting to where you are to the vision that you want to be at? So for example, if your vision is to build the largest, most trusted and cost-effective last mile network capable of powering industry-leading proposition, the specific words that we've chosen here is something that is measured. Because when you have a list of things you need to work on, the importance of it can be measured if you know your goal, which is measurable. If you just say build the largest, most trusted and not explain what does that mean, again, for me, largest could mean number one in the US. For Ryan, largest could mean something else. So you're already starting with the disconnect that would probably create a lot of churn. So here, when we're saying this is our vision, you're measuring it by, your local market share. When you say trusted, you mean your on-time delivery needs to be a certain number, your NPS, CSAT, the number of active drivers needs to be a certain number. And when you're saying cost effective, your cost per delivery needs to be a certain number. And how do you achieve it in a high level terminology that makes sense to people? In year 1, you probably strengthen your foundation. Year 2, you build volume. Year 3, you are the primary provider for the company. So you're kind of achieving all the things that you want in your vision through this process. So the question that you need to ask yourself when you have your intake process and all your requests are coming in is, will it increase my market share? Will it increase OTD? Will it reduce your cost of delivery? So these constant asking of questions will have an initial level of filtering to your ask, so that if you know that none of these are being met, then maybe it's not important now. It is possibly important, but is it important now? Maybe not, because the goal that you want to achieve right now is something else. So you can already have like this initial filtering that you put when you have a goal that is measurable, and you ask these questions of, does it meet your goal?
Sneha, we had a question from the audience. John asked, what does the acronym CSAT stand for?
It's customer satisfaction, and NPS is Net Promoter Score. So again, if you Google it, you'll see the difference between NPS, where somebody recommends the experience on a scale of 0 to 10, which is NPS, and CSAT is more specific on the experiences. Like if you go through a delivery journey or a pickup journey, you buy a product, how was your customer satisfaction going through that specific journey?
Yeah, and I really love, Sneha, how you and Sephora have only picked 3. Those are 3 aligning principles, because too often I see people have way too many and it's hard to focus. Was that very deliberate to choose only 3?
So this is not a Sephora example. This is example from my past life.
Ooh, okay.
But yes, this again, if you pick, again, we want the world, right? Like it's hard for us as humans to limit saying, I just want XYZ. So you're already prioritizing what you want when you pick a limited number. And again, three is not like a standard per se, but just going through the iterative process that we had during our vision, for us, three was kind of like a magical number that we knew was just enough for us to achieve, but also the reach was a little bit more that we can push ourselves to do a little bit more. So that's how we ended up with three. But again, that doesn't mean that everybody needs to align with it. And that's a good point that you bring up, Ryan, because one of the key takeaways that I have is also like you test and learn your features, you test and A/B test like all the things that you're building. So it's also really good to A/B test your process of prioritization and see it if it makes sense. And that's how we landed on this number three, because there were multiple A/B tests per se that we had during the process of making sure that the vision makes sense. So how do you make sure that they are measurable? Now that you have your vision, you have identified your KPIs that would explain the vision and your 3-year strategy. How do you build things that are measurable? So if your goal, for example, I have picked one example here where you want your vision to be your cost effective last mile network, which means you need to decrease your cost of delivery from, say, for example, $15 to $12. You have a list of features that are coming in that would possibly align with this goal of decreasing your cost, be it batching more orders in a trip, increasing driver utilization by increasing relevancy of the orders that they're getting, or reducing call center costs for where is my order, by providing more self-servicing and visibility. So you will get a lot of things that align with a particular vision or a goal that is measurable. But then how do you then break it down to say, I wish we lived in a world where we had endless money and resources that you could do it all, but unfortunately we don't. So out of all of these three, which one would you pick? So if we go down to the next level of, okay, if I do batching orders, I would probably decrease my cost per delivery by $2 versus $1 for my next feature and 0.5 for my third. So you already have this prioritization framework set up for your larger prioritization, and it makes sense and it resonates with people. So I can go to the table to my stakeholders, my engineering partners, UX and business, and say, this is what I think we recommended that we should do, as opposed to not having this, the metrics here and just saying that I feel we should do batching orders because it makes sense, because then you are putting others in a position where they're like, yes, Sneha, we trust you, but we trust data more. So I'm not quite sure why we need to do this. So how do you get all your next level features also to be KPI driven? So then it's kind of easy to explain why we are picking one over the other. Now, these are the easy things. I think the tough things is quantifying strategy and foundational. And there are pros and cons of this, because I have seen times where strategy is like a overrated word that we use for anything that we are not able to have a KPI. We just say it's strategic or foundational. So how do you, be more deliberate about even quantifying your strategy and your foundational initiatives? And there are multiple ways how this could be done, but again, you need to identify what works best for you. A couple of ways this could be done is adding strategy or foundation as a variable in your scoring that you are giving for each KPI, could you also possibly score strategy and foundation so that you can then evaluate your rules and your scoring along with the other features for things that need to be foundational and strategy? How do you another way is adding value, right? So you extrapolate value that it will bring to in the future and assume X percentage of that will be actualized in a year. So if you say that, building personalization is going to increase my ROI by 50 million, maybe 10% of that is going to be actualized in year one, 25% in year two, and the rest in year three. So go with the assumption that this is possibly what we can, but you can also go back at the end of year one and see if it actually made sense. Yes, you had assumed it was 10%, maybe it was not. So you can always course correct it. This does not have to be set in stone, and you don't have to put a lot of pressure on yourself that it needs to be accurate. It's more framework so that you can be accountable and you can go back and change things. And certain things are like must-haves, right? So, it's just so obvious that it is must-have and there's no debate at all. Like the minute a person asks, is this a must-have? That's a time where probably it's not as obvious to everyone that this is a must-have. So again, there's no like secret sauce that one works better than the other. It really depends on the situation you're in and what makes most sense. Another things that we need to think about is legal and compliance. Again, similar strategy of like, how do you quantify your legal and compliance asks as well, which means one is, if impacted, what is the possible cost that this would cause and by when, right? So if you're getting sued for certain things that you're not doing, if there is a breach, or if there's certain things that happen because you didn't implement a certain feature, what is the end extreme of how much it will cost the company and by when? So you're then also converting your compliance and your legal asks to a quantifiable number so that it doesn't go with, hey, just legal asked us to do it, but it's more like, if we don't do this, then this is the impact. And of course, there is law that we need to follow. We can't question the law. So if it is mandatory based on the law, it comes on top of your list because we just have to get it done. Okay. So now we spoke about how do you organize things? How do you define what is important? Now, how do you deal with get it done or dealt with first? So this is where we talk a little bit more on time to value versus time to market. When we say dealt with first, it does not mean that get it done first and it is a win because we got it done in like 3 sprints as opposed to 6 sprints. What we are actually measuring is the time it takes for adoption, for people to actually use it, and the actualization of the value that we hope that this feature would bring. So it's important for us to focus on the time to value as opposed to time to market. Here is an example of, an agility framework where we're driving value instead of speed to market. So the omni-channel journey that we kind of embarked on in the past couple of years, like we were looking at not just like releasing features that made sense for our omni-channel journey, but the value that it brings, which is the percentage of omni sales that we had while we were releasing some of these features. So be it like reserve online pickup in store, curbside pickup, same day delivery, same day unlimited. What we were actually measuring is the value that it was bringing to the table in terms of the percentage of omni sales this had. Now, bringing it all together, it's like, you have all your ingredients. Now you're putting it all together to create this fabulous dish that everybody will like. There are, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the frameworks itself because there are much better documented, content out there on some of these frameworks, but figure out what works best for you. And it also doesn't mean that you have to use one or the other. You could use a combination of some of these. Like, for example, we usually start with the Moscow priority, right? Which is like your must have, should have, could have, and will not have. You have your even playing field, you have your currency, you have your impact. You can create a threshold that says must have is greater than ROI of 5 million, should have is between 3 to 5, could have is less than 1, will not have is, if it's less than 1 million. So you are already creating the first level of prioritization, and then you go to the next level where you're actually seeing your actualized annualized benefit, your client reach, your business importance, as well as your engineering effort, because we would love to do something that would, give us an ROI of 60 million. But if it takes us 3 years to do it, as opposed to something else, like, does it make sense for us to do it? So combining some of these frameworks would then help you get together with, what is the prioritization prioritized features that you want to build. And most importantly, which I think is very underrated and not at all, spoken about a lot, is telling the story of how we started and how we got to this list of prioritized features, right? So it's super critical for us to make sure we explain the process, we involve everyone in the process, and not that, product management goes in a room, does everything, and comes out and says, here you go, tada, here's the list. But you're actually bringing every stakeholder during the process, and also make room for feedback and improvement, because as I mentioned before, this is not like a one and done process that you build and then it's going to stick around for the next 10 years. Like, things will change, pandemics will come, like so many external factors will influence the process itself. So how do you make sure that you're explaining the story that really resonates with your stakeholders as well? So I spent some time talking on, what is the process? How do we do it? What are some of the frameworks that we use? But one of the key things that I have seen makes prioritization successful is the people and the mindset and how the organization is structured, that empowers people to do this process in the right way, and we are not bogged down by red tape or like anything else. So along with the most obvious things that you do need to do in your prioritization process, it's also important to look at the people and is the organization set up for the process itself. So which means that from a product mindset, like, how do you change, how do you make sure that change drives innovation, and you're looking at a more customer-centric approach versus organizational beliefs. You're looking at time to value versus time to market. You're prioritizing growth versus perfection of product, because at the end of the day, you're looking at time to value and not like the perfect product. And you're also building sustainable teams versus dispatching projects, because if your team is not built in such a way that is long lasting and that has fun at the end of the day, then your productivity is lost, because you're becoming more of a machine where you're dispatching projects instead of teams. I know, Ryan,
I'm on mute. I'm sorry. So, but I had a mentor once tell me, don't let perfect get in the way of better. And that has stuck with me ever since, which sounds a lot like you're prioritizing growth over perfection.
Yes. I think personally, outside of product management, also, like, this is a journey that I have, embarked on in the last couple of years, where initially I always had this thing that I need to get everything done perfectly, which stressed me out and created a lot of problems in my health. But I think inherently, like, as human beings, we have to prioritize growth versus perfection of the things that we do. The next is communication. Like, motivated people creates more innovation. So how do you, once you create this process and you're actually seeing the impact, like, how do you inform the impact of their contribution? Because everybody needs to be part of this journey and feel like they made an impact. So although as our being product managers, we are kind of front facing some of these conversations, it's extremely important to make sure that we inform the impact of every single individual who contributed to the initiatives that we are working on. How do you invest in like personal and professional growth, be it certifications or mentorship? How do you encourage trying new things, fluidity within the company? And how do you incubate ideation and hacks so that, as I mentioned, employees are your biggest source of ideas, and you're creating an environment where this is coming to life as well. Then building agility. I think there's always this confusion that process hinders agility. And I constantly, reiterate that streamlining things does not mean you're losing agility. And streamlining things does not mean you're going back to the waterfall model where, it takes you 6 months just to have the intake process. So how do you find a balance of transitioning to an agile process where probably in year one, you create the concept of express lane, right? You have one stream of work, you have 2 to 3 weeks of sprints, and you have prioritized projects. Then you move on to the next year where you have more than one stream, same 2 to 3 week sprints, but then you have project domains, which are KPI driven. Eventually, you're having this product delivery model where you have multiple outcome driven streams, and you have continuous improvements that kind of comes in and goes. So this process becomes part of your DNA, and it's not something you have to constantly reiterate on how it should be done. Now, how do you measure your outcome? Because if you can't measure, you should probably not invest in it. Defining KPI and measurement of success, we spoke about it a little bit. Testing the hypothesis to statistical measurement, getting feedback, multi-directional feedback from the different sources that you have, which is all part of the functional validation. But then you also need to do the technical validation versus, measuring your, having your audience go through certain code versus another part of your audience goes to another code, and you're validating your technical feasibility as well. Here is an example of, our navigation design iterations that we went through, where we had 10 plus iterations for each channel. And for each channel, we mean like like the front end website, the apps, more than 600 client interviews, 250 hours of research. But then ultimately, like we were able to measure the design itself, and we saw an uplift in conversion of 1.4%. And these were the winners for, the front end and the apps as well. So even for design initiatives, like how do you make sure you're measuring your outcomes?
Sneha, that was a quick question from the class about the organizational beliefs that you had mentioned a little while ago. They were just asking if you could say a few words more about what do you mean by that?
When I spoke about like what not to think of in terms of impact, like I gave a few examples of this is how it's been done before. This is what the industry standard is. This is what our competitors are doing. I think organizationally, if people believe that that is a good enough answer for prioritization, I think it's an input for conversation, right? Wherein we have to change the mindset of the people that we are working with, that yes, these are good conversations to start with, but definitely not a way for us to prioritize, because then your whole framework goes for a toss, because now you're comparing quantitative things with qualitative things, which might not, truly end up in the outcome that you wanted.
Perfect.
Now, how do you also look at where do you invest in through analytics as well, right? So there's analytics after you launch something that says this is KPI driven and, this is the success. But even for us to say that, yes, we need to invest in this, like how do you make sure you build the analytics? So here's an example of, our product page analytics insights that we saw, where, of course, your call to your CTR is like 44%, but your conversion is 12%. But however, your engagement with swatches, your CTR was 30%, your click-through rate was 30%, but your conversion was 28%. So now we know that engagement with swatches is something that we want to invest in more, because your analytics is telling you that this is something that we are seeing a higher conversion rate. which we then put to testing, and we responsified the page. We did a couple of enhancements, and we saw an uplift in RPV by 0.6%. So measuring outcomes not only for projects that you've already delivered, but also measuring the outcomes for things you want to work on so that it can be part of your prioritization cycle as well. And investing in teams, as I've mentioned, like in the past, I think certain companies were working as projects, right? You had project teams, you were assembled by projects, you had all of these people working on the multiple projects that you have. I've seen a lot of companies transition into this pod, or like two pizza teams, or however you want to call it, which is your dedicated team, which has like an outcome based on a domain. And the benefits is that you see like cross-functional coordination, you reduce resource flexing, you increase focus on business outcomes, and you increase ownership and empowerment as well. So how your teams are structured, that can help you bring your prioritization framework to life in the most optimal way, is also something that you could possibly think about. And then last but not the least, like figuring out when you need to evaluate and discontinue. Like here are a couple of examples of, we had the virtual artist from 2017 to 20, it didn't reap the benefits that we wanted. It was discontinued. We have the voice search. It is still there only on the apps, but not something that we're investing in. Live video chat, we didn't continue. So evaluating and discontinuing, like I know you've prioritized certain things and you've put all this effort, but if you're not seeing the results that you want, make the hard decision of like letting it go and discontinue, and invest in the things that make most sense. Finally, the process, right? So once you have the framework, you've set up the people for success, and you've set up the process, the result is, the outcome that you've seen for the changes, where your investment continues to remain the same or more, but your revenue, or like the outcome that is coming out of the investment that you put in, like your trajectory, like is exponentially higher than what would have been if it was in the old ways of working. So as I mentioned that, it's good to evaluate the process itself. Like, is your prioritization system working? Is the process working? One of the things to look at is like, for the investment that you're putting in, how much are you actually reaping the benefits? And if it is making sense that you're able to do more with less that you have already put in. Finally, the key takeaways, even if you went, you slept through the whole presentation, or you were doing something else, multitasking, being on Instagram, a few key takeaways that I would love for everybody to remember is, making sure that we define a framework that is customized to your ways of working. You're testing and evaluating the framework itself with cross-functional feedback. You're able to explain the process and outcome in a logical way, because if you're not able to do that, it's going to be hard for people to be, part of the journey. You're embracing your constraints, and you're not getting stuck in your beliefs of, this was just how it was done, and it's an industry standard, or, this is what everybody else is doing. So thank you so much. That was the end of my presentation. I think, Ryan, you have a few things to say, and then we'll move on to Q&A.
Yes, actually, I think can move right into Q&A. What a wonderful presentation, Sneha. Thank you. The first one I do want to ask, actually, we had a question about that the outcome slide you were showing. It was like a bar graph, and there was an acronym there of MUSD. And the question was, what does that mean? That acronym?
It's millions in US dollars.
Millions in US dollars. Okay, thank you. All right, so what we'd like to do, if you want to just advance to the next slide, Sneha, we can start our official question and answer. So the first one we have is from John. He would like to know, how do you see the integration of product management, project management, and procurement management for achieving enterprise agility?
How do I see the integration?
Mhm.
I think each of these functional roles have a place to play in your success, right? And for us, I think when the product manager is looking at the why and the how, project management is looking at the when, and making sure that the milestones in the when are met appropriately, and then procurement also participates in the how, because if we are going with a vendor as opposed to like building it in house, we go through this whole RFP process to make sure that we are picking the right vendor. So they're part of the how. So for me, like when we're looking at an initiative or like a project, apart from the people, when I said like our team, it's also defining the roles and responsibilities of the cross-functional stakeholders as well.
Perfect. So we have another question from Shetta Drew. They're looking for if you cannot measure, then you probably shouldn't work on it. You kind of made that statement, Sneha. If you can't measure it, we probably shouldn't do it. And the question is, how do you get senior leadership to believe that? How can we help bring them along to those ideas?
Unfortunately, there is no easy answer for that. What I have seen help me is ask the questions of like, why? Like, I believe we should not, because we are not able to measure, get the senior leadership's point of view on if otherwise, what makes you think the otherwise makes sense. So if there is a strong enough answer that not just you, but the team that is working on also is aligned with it, then sure. And I'll warn you, this is not going to be an easy conversation. So it also depends on, how flexible your senior leadership is and taking feedback as well. But that's where when you explain the process of prioritization and why you need certain things to be measured, because in your framework, if certain things are not measurable, you're not able to provide the right effort for the things that you can actually measure, also helps bring senior leadership in the journey of why every single thing needs to be measurable as well.
Got it. Great advice. One more question from the group, or I think we have a couple more actually, is when we're considering the flavor of agile framework we are using, how to align product management to that as we set priorities?
How to align product management with the flavor of agile. I think when you're building the flavor of agile, you're keeping in mind already what role product management plays. So it's kind of not like an afterthought, but more part of the process itself. And that's where when people ask me, are you which agile framework or are you agile? I always say that, it's either a Sephora version of agile or a Walmart version of agile, because it's really dependent on the maturity of the organization that you're in and the maturity of what product management plays in the organization as well, where certain companies, it's more engineering driven, certain companies are more product management driven. So what kind of a flavor is the organization structure to see the right flavor of agile framework?
Got it. And you had flashed up a slide earlier with some prioritization techniques. I saw Moscow there, and we have a question that's, I use WSJF, or weighted shortest jobs first, to prioritize development work. What are some other prioritization models that you would recommend, Sneha?
My answer is I would not recommend any, right? Because that's where we fall prey to make fitting everything else, because we've chosen a framework as WSJF or like Moscow or any of this, and you're kind of putting everything else in that context because you've already made that decision. My recommendation would be to take a step back and say, in all the different frameworks that we have, what are the good pieces of it that make sense for your organization, and build a customized framework, because not one single framework suits all. And that's where I mentioned Maybe you can even use multiple because you start with the Moscow framework and then you move on to a Bryce or then you move on to something else. But if it is when you're getting feedback on your process and you're saying, did this make sense or no? If you're getting like, Sneha, I have no freaking clue what you just did, then it means that the framework that you built kind of didn't make sense.
Got it. That's great. So one more question that we'll take, and then we'll wrap everything up. And that is a question that I often must balance technical debt with new product development. How can I compare something that does not create customer value, like technical debt, with something that does, like new product development? How do we make those comparisons?
I think that falls to the bucket of efficiency, right? Technical debt, you're probably doing it because one, either the technology is outdated, two, you won't get support for it in the future, three, it is costing us more to build a feature on outdated technology as opposed to some new technology which will help us build things faster. So there is still a reason why why you consider something as a tech debt. And if we can say that, okay, either it will result in cost savings because it's efficiency, time savings because what would take us to build like 3 months is now going to be done in 2 months. Self-serviceability, it would take you 5 people to get this task done, but with this it's so easy that one person can do it. Like you can add numbers to it and have like a efficiency play to like the tech debt as well.
Perfect. So Sneha, if you don't mind advancing the slide once.
Sure.
Yeah, and everybody, we can't thank you enough for joining us today. And if you want to learn more about the services the 280 Group offers, like customizing and even using prioritization frameworks to meet your specific needs, you can check out our flagship product, which is Optimal Product Management Training course. And Sneha, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. This was fantastic. The information you shared is really awesome, and can't wait to try to use some of these techniques that you've taught us. This is great.
Thank you so much, Ryan and Nicole, for having me. I hope I got to add some value.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.